if you guys actually are familiar with the acronym. So it's Business Development Bank of Canada. So just a show of hands, like who's familiar with BDC? That's really good. Awesome. Okay, so for those who aren't, BDC is actually the only bank in Canada that's dedicated exclusively to entrepreneurs. So with that, again, for those who aren't familiar, BDC actually provides more of a partnership role to the traditional charter banks. So we actually help with everything for an entrepreneur coming right from the ground up to working capital for projects to grow, equipment purchasing, real estate, and kind of everything in between. So we actually have two pillars. So we have our financing side, and then we also have a coaching side that provides advice. So for those of you who aren't exactly familiar with what we do, how many in the room are actually entrepreneurs? How many are students? Maybe a bit of both?
How many are students?
I'm a student. Oh, great. Well, welcome. Thank you.
How many are going to be entrepreneurs?
Going to be?
And I was going to say, and how many are? Yeah. So there's a mix.
Yeah, that's great. So where BDC comes in, so again, being the only bank in Canada that's dedicated to entrepreneurs, we've been actually around for 70 plus years. So we've been in this a long time. We really figured out, how to help entrepreneurs. So what I'll try to do is again, we'll leave enough time for Carla. Carla's actually one of my colleagues, again, out of Kelowna. So I'm on the financing side, so I help entrepreneurs actually physically get the funds that they need to either start their business, grow their business, help them with their projects, for their dreams, essentially. And then with it, I'm actually really passionate about BCorp, and again, you're all here today to learn how that's different and how BDC. So Carla's actually going to cover that side of it a bit more. But on the how to start a business, we want to make sure we have enough time so that you guys can actually ask questions and actually figure that out. And then again, if we run out of time, we've got cards, and you can certainly have one-on-one conversations as well. So do you have enough? I want to make sure you have enough time.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully we have lots of time for questions. So I'm Carla Heim, and I'm Senior Advisor of Social Entrepreneurship at BDC. So I've been with the bank a long time, over 14 years, and I was a senior lender and had a very large portfolio for a long time. But I've been dedicated to this movement now for about 7 years. I've always been part of BDC's Corporate Social Responsibility Council, but we've morphed that into more of the BCorp team over the past few years. So who here has even heard about BCorp? Do you think anybody's ever bought any products from BCorp?
Probably.
Yeah? BCorp certified? No. So can anybody tell me one BCorp? Okay, all right, well, so we're starting from ground up here this morning, or this afternoon. That's okay.
Fiasco Gelato. It was in
Yes, there you go, and that's a great local example. Awesome, that's excellent. Yeah, they're BCorp certified. So, so we're going to start today. I'm just going to give you a little bit of an overview of why BCorp certification is really important and some of the trends in the marketplace. And certainly some of them are going to be really familiar to you. I probably won't be educating you there, but bringing those things all together really is the backstory as to why this certification is so important. So the first thing is BDC they always do a study around Small Business Week. Welcome.
Hello.
They always do a study around Small Business Week every year, so we always release something. And about 3 years ago, we did one on consumers, and we really looked into what consumer practices were. And again, this is 3 years ago, so today some of these stats might even be stronger than what they are now. But one of the major trends was they do want to buy local, and so much so that 97% said that they really want to buy local products. And they're looking into that and questioning that. And I would say even on Amazon, people are buying local. They're actually thinking about local even though they're ordering it online. They're like, where is that made? Where is it coming from? Consumers are questioning this all the time now, which is a good thing. It really is. The other piece is the environment. This one kind shocked me from 3 years ago. But consumers were really concerned. How is my product or service affecting the environment? So much so that 87% said that was part of their buying decision, which is, those are two strong factors, and I think today they're equally as strong. The next thing I want to talk about is, of course, the next generation, the millennials, for example. Deloitte did a recent study on the millennials, so the next generation. And they said, what do you think the purpose of business is? And they said to help create a better world. Those two things are completely intertwined. That's super important to them. And this is big. That's never really been as strong with previous generations, basically. So they said, yeah, if I'm gonna work for a place, I wanna bring my whole self to work, and I wanna feel like I'm making a difference every day. So even though they might be building a certain widget, they wanna know that that company is really responsible in other ways. It's not all about financial return. And as we know, here in Alberta, it's a little bit different right now. I know the labor market is a bit softer, but in all of Canada, the labor market is actually a problem. And we're gonna see that we're gonna have major shortages over the next 10 years.
What is a label market?
Labor.
Oh, labor market.
Labor market, yeah, labor shortage. Pardon me, if I didn't say that clear enough for you. So the labor shortages are going to be a huge issue. So motivating and attracting this generation is going to be very important. The labor study I'll share with you after this event, because actually it's really interesting, and it was the Small Business Week release this year. So again, another important aspect. So the other thing that I'm constantly talking about nowadays is the future of capitalism. And a lot of times it's referred to as Capitalism 2.0, because things are really changing. And as capitalism was previously, it was kind of all about shareholder return, make the most of money possible, and now we have about 1% of the people on the planet having most of the wealth. And that is what capitalism has created. So that's a definite problem. So interestingly enough, a couple things have happened recently with BlackRock and Danone. Now, does anybody know who BlackRock is?
No.
Great, awesome, excellent. Nobody else?
Aren't they
Okay.
a hedge fund?
Yeah, yeah. And Danone, does anybody know who Danone is?
Yogurt.
Awesome, excellent. Some people don't know who Danone is, which surprises me, but so I always definitely go through it just in case. So BlackRock is a huge investment firm. In fact, they have about 4.1, I think it's actually up to about $6 trillion in assets this year. And a year ago, the CEO of BlackRock, Larry Fink, he actually created an open letter to his 500 CEOs of all these different companies that they particularly invest in. And he said, if you don't start thinking about societal value in what you're doing every day, so how you're affecting society, the environment, how you're treating your employees, we may not do business with you going forward. That was huge. In fact, he got a lot of resistance about it, but he's held strong. He said, no, that is the reality. That is the new reality. And it's interesting because I think Larry is a really good guy. I'm thrilled he said something like that. But I think really he sees that the risk of a company not caring about their employees, the environment, or the community at large is too big a risk nowadays. So, you know, he's somebody that says, no, we're not going to tolerate that anymore. And he just released his second letter to his CEOs, which basically is saying even more, we're going to lean into this. And this year's letter really had a little bit more to do about climate change and the issues there, and how we really need to be aware of those things and maybe improving on the practices in order to reverse it. So, if you can reverse it, basically. So, he carried on, even though he got some resistance, he still thinks that's very, very important. So that was a big thing that happened last year. The next example I have is Danone. Their head office is in Paris, in France. But they have companies all over the world. So they have a Danone Canada, they have a Danone North America, and they have several all over. They're a huge, huge company. And their CEO is completely committed to doing things differently. He's committed to Capitalism 2.0 and sustainability. So much so that they recently negotiated massive loan, and they had 12 different lenders involved. So it was a syndicated loan where all those lenders got together, created the terms and conditions that everybody had to agree on. And for the first time ever on a loan like that, Danone included their environmental, social, and governance score, their ESG score, into those loan terms and conditions. So basically, the better they do, the less they pay on their loan. That was a big, big deal. That's never happened before. There are a few banks in the world that are completely dedicated to sustainability, like Tritos Bank. It's a European bank, but and they basically only deal with sustainable companies. They won't even finance anybody else. There aren't a lot of banks like that, but to have 12 leading lenders, I mean, HSBC was one of those lenders, actually agree to this. That's pretty incredible. So all of those things, bringing them forward, kind of basically are what I'm here to talk to you about all day, or for the next hour, pardon me. I won't be here all day. And so that's some of the trends, and these are some of the people I wanted to talk to you about, because these people are amazing. So my first example is Steve. Has anybody ever had a beer from Beau's Brewery? All right, that's excellent. They are an incredible family-owned business. Steve and his dad started the business. They're just outside of Ottawa. And they really created this business to be a part of the community. They employ locally, they use all organic products, they really, really feel passionate about homelessness, and so they worked with an organization to employ people that were homeless and get them off of the streets. And that's because Steve feels that he knows the facts. He knows that if you're homeless, you know, you're likely to die there, and you're also likely to die sooner than you should. So he really wants to make a difference. And I think they're up to about 15 people that are actually working in their factories and everything that they've actually employed through this program. So that's really important to him. He also is involved in some work over in Rwanda. I mean, the summary is he's way more than just beer. He is an incredible entrepreneur. So Beau's Brewing is doing so incredibly well that lots of rumors were going around, and they were talking about how successful they were, and oh my gosh, I wonder if somebody big is going to come in and purchase it, and then everything will change. Well, Steve thought he better put an end to these rumors, so he got together all of the employees in the room, and he said, I know there's a lot of rumors going around that we're going to sell, and he announced, yes, you're correct, we're going to sell. But what he did was he actually launched an employee ownership share program. So he sold to all of his employees. And of course, they were thrilled, because what this does is it keeps his business local, which is incredible. So he really, really feels that that shared and durable prosperity is really important. So I love Steve. Last time we had coffee, he showed up in a full shamrock suit. He's just got this big personality. He's amazing. So yeah. So Brian Taylor is another really unique example. He owns a company called Fair Trade Jewelry, and that's in Toronto. But if you go into this jewelry store, it's actually empty. He only does jewelry to order, and he only buys from small artisanal gold mining companies, and of course sustainable diamonds and gems, etc. He knows the backstory to everything. And he actually feels so strongly about this opaque industry that he really, really wants to show that there is a better way, and he wants to shed light on it. Because a lot of people don't even understand where their diamond or their gold has come from and the harm that it's actually doing. But he is actually determined to make sure people understand that. And he recently actually launched a documentary on a small little community that was involved in large-scale mining, and their way of life was being threatened. Their water was contaminated. It was really a bad news story. But they actually took it back and started doing all small-scale mining, which means like literally hand mining. It's labor-intensive, but the results are still just as good. And they actually spend 6 months of the year mining, and the other 6 months of the year farming. And they can drink their water now. Their way of life has been reestablished, and it's a really awesome story. And actually BDC funded his documentary, so I can share that with you as well. It's pretty cool. So he is so committed to this, he's actually even gotten death threats because he's shining a light on something that has a so transparent in the past. But the also really cool thing about his jewelry store, he's growing 40% year over year. And if I present in Toronto, I'm like, have you heard of fair trade jewelry? And people hold up their hands with their rings because he's well known in Toronto, that's for sure. And I think at this time, he's still the only fair trade jewelry company in Canada. So it's a very unique market that he's into. So, but again, Ryan has a huge personality, really committed to that aspect of his business, but also runs a very successful business. My third example is Natalie. She is a powerhouse. She's amazing. But today I'm not going to go into much detail about her because we just, BDC just recently launched the BCorp Effect podcasts. They can be found on bbc.ca and I will share them with you after. And Natalie was one of the entrepreneurs that we interviewed, and she tells her story so well that I don't even want to wreck it for you. So I no longer talk directly about Natalie, but I really encourage that you take the 20 minutes to listen to the podcast because she has an incredible story. She was forced to take over her dad's business. She was a social worker, really determined to make a difference in communities, etc. And then she was forced to take over 1.5 million square feet of commercial real estate in Montreal. Couldn't be more different. But she brought them together, and it's quite a story. So definitely take the time to listen to that. So obviously, these entrepreneurs, these certifications, if you've heard of, ISO certifies a process. If you've heard of certified organic, will certify the product is organic. LEED certification means that the building that we're in has, so these are all specific certifications. There's no certification that looks at the entire business. And I just described to you what those entrepreneurs are up to. They don't fit into one of these categories. They're doing all of it or very progressive parts of some of these things that don't even exist in terms of certifications. So they have chosen BCorp as their certification. So being a certified BCorp, you may have all these other certifications as well, but it's the only certification that absolutely looks at everything you're doing within your business. So it's very unique in that way, and there is no other one worldwide. So there's 3 steps to becoming a B Corp. The first is really about what I just presented to you about. It's about the entrepreneur. Like if you really feel this way about your business, you have that commitment, you can probably get certified, honestly, because you have to have that commitment first. If you're an entrepreneur that is really just caring about your shareholder return, that you don't care about how you treat your employees or anything else, you don't have any policies and procedures in place, nothing, then you probably can't certify. And even if you hired a company to come in and do the assessment for you and all the rest of it to get you certified, you probably won't remain certified because it's not who you are in your DNA as an organization. So it's really the commitment of the entrepreneur that you have to have first. The second thing is you have to complete the B impact assessment, and you have to score 80 out of 200 points. The third thing is you have to change your articles of incorporation. So current articles of incorporation basically say that you're responsible to the shareholders. That's it. But you will actually change your articles of incorporation to say you will consider all stakeholders, your shareholders, your employees, your environment, your community, all those things. And what that does is really just allow you to make decisions for the company that may produce smaller dividends at the end of the year or change certain things. It means that you can actually make those decisions and the shareholders have to be okay with it. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So this B impact assessment that I talked about, that's out of 200 points, it considers some major areas within your business. So it looks at first your governance, which is basically how you set up your company, your board of directors, your mission statement, that type of thing. It'll look at your employee practices, so your workers, and how you treat them, promote them, train them, their benefits, etc., all of that. We'll then look at your relationship with the community And that might include some volunteer programs that you have done. It could be a check you write to the United Way every year. But more so, it looks at your supplier diversity programs. It looks at your relationship with the community, and what you are doing within that. Do you employ from your local community? Do you buy from your local community? It gets pretty deep into all those types of questions. It'll also look at your environmental practices. So if you're a company that's within, just leases space, that's pretty easy. You'll just find out your environmental footprint there and move on with it. I mean, it doesn't get more complicated than that, really. But if you're producing widgets and you've got a supply chain and there's a little bit more that you've got to actually map, like end of life cycles, etc., that piece can get very complicated, just depending.
So all of this is gonna take time. You're gonna have to write up your governance plan, and there'll be a lot of input, a lot of your time thrown into that. How, is any of it third-party verified?
All of it is. That's the
So your time, then your money, then wait for them to do the work, and then you can get that. It's quite a commitment.
It's a big commitment, yeah, no doubt about it, it's a big commitment. And the final thing it looks at is the impact of your products and services. So it really is a holistic view at your entire business. Now, your observation is completely right, that's a lot of time. But as well, it's gonna basically future-proof your business, and it's gonna reduce your risks because you've actually documented all of your policies and procedures, etc. So some people go into this assessment and they get it done really quick, and it's all there, because that's how they do business already. They have it all mapped out. They already identified that their employee practices were super important. Go ahead.
You, go ahead if,
Yeah, I was just gonna
what
say.
you're going to say is what I'm asking.
Yeah, so some people can complete the assessment and it won't take any time, and others have to actually set goals to kind of bring them up to the 80 mark. So it just depends on where you are as a business. Go ahead.
So let's say a new business, they want to set up and build on this model,
Yeah.
Or use this as a model to build. What's the benefits to them of doing that, other than the obvious,
Sure.
you know, you're
Absolutely.
doing it right?
I do have a section that I'm gonna go through on benefits. I'm gonna get a little bit deeper into that. But yeah, absolutely, everything has to have a return on investment, right? Because this is a lot of time that you're spending. So for sure, we're gonna talk about that. Absolutely. Any other questions before I go ahead? We're okay right now? Okay. So when the founders of B-Lab first came up with the B-Impact assessment over 11 years ago, they went out to 2,000 businesses worldwide, and they asked them to complete this assessment. And traditional businesses actually came in around the 40 to 50 mark. Businesses that had a really strong CSR department, maybe released a CSR report every year, really came in around the 60 to 75 mark. But the
CSR being
business-
customer service.
No, corporate social responsibility.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. I apologize for my acronyms. And the ones that really had it all baked into their DNA would come in at around the 80 mark. And that's why they set it at 80. Because when I usually say 80 out of 200, people think, oh, that's easy, that's not even 50%, I got this. But it is actually hard to get to the 80 mark. So they've made it hard, and they actually redo this assessment every 2 years, so it even gets harder. So BDC, the organization I work for, we're BCorp certified. And our score is right now 96.5. And in previous, for visibility or whatever, no, you can't fake it. It has to be who you are as an organization for sure. And it does get harder. They keep keeping it up. The newest assessment was just released. It's version 6. And they took about 8,000 pieces of feedback and information, and it's huge, the amount of stuff they put into version 6 to keep it very relevant and current. That's really important to them. So, and you're right about the third-party verification. You complete this assessment, and then it goes in and gets third-party verified, which helps because that's your differentiator, that you actually have that stamp saying, what I'm doing, I'm actually doing, and that's important. So the legal piece, as I mentioned, you have to change this. And I'll tell you a little bit of a story about B-Lab. So B-Lab was created by 3 founders, and they used to own a huge basketball apparel company called And One. I don't know if anybody remembers that. I'm definitely old enough to remember And One. And they did extremely well. They created this business like over 25 years ago now that had on-site daycare, basketball courts, flexible work schedules. That was unheard of back then, but they had a lot of fun, and they created something that was really amazing. And the 3 founders got an offer to purchase from a very large apparel company. And they decided to take it without thinking about everything that they had created and their employees, because they just made the assumption that they would carry that on. But within 3 months, they stripped it of everything, and within 6 months, that company went bankrupt. And the founders felt sick. They thought, there has to be more to business, like doing business is a force for good.
Yeah, what happened to all those relationships, eh?
Yeah.
Who makes money in it, it's baloney.
And they felt sick, and they said, this can't happen. So that's why they came up with this BCorp certification. They felt really strongly that business has a bigger responsibility. And the legal change was important because if they had changed their articles of incorporations to consider all stakeholders, not just shareholder return, it allows you some negotiating power when you sell your business. It allows you to make decisions that say, you know what, we're gonna pay a little bit more for this because we know it's sustainably produced. They make a little bit less in the margins, but I think it'll all work out in the end, and you can make a decision like that. And that's why the legal piece is so important to them. That's why it's part of it and incorporated in. However, I'm going to tell you about something that I used to not get into, but it's now a little bit more relevant. There is BCorp certification, but you may have also heard of benefit corporation legislation. So what happened, this is like 11 years ago when they first launched, in the US, they found that in some states, they actually could not change the articles of incorporation. It was illegal. Meaning that it was illegal to have a company that thought of anything but shareholder return, which seems crazy. In Canada, that's not an issue. You can change your articles here and it's not a problem. But in the US, what they ended up doing was they created this benefit corporation legislation, which allowed you to create a company that considers all shareholders from the get-go. And they actually have 33 states, Italy and Puerto Rico, that currently have adopted this benefit corporation legislation. It's also on the table in BC right now. So it's going to 3rd reading in the spring here. So it's even being talked about here, because what we have found is that there's actually over 7,000 benefit corporations that have registered. So it helps to create this movement around doing business as a force for good. Not all 7,000 obviously are BCorp certified, but at least they've set their intention that that's the kind of company they want to create. A lot of benefit corporations decide to achieve BCorp certification. So it's a little bit more relevant, and you may hear more about it. I have a feeling if it does get passed in BC, it'll be something that other provinces take a look at creating. But like I said, in Canada right now, you can change your articles of incorporation as long as your shareholders are happy and your lawyer is happy. You can do it here. So it's not that hard to do here. Any questions about that? Okay, so we're going to talk about some of the benefits. It is a big deal to get BCorp certification. It's hard, and it's meant to be hard. I remember one of the early conferences that I went to, somebody asked, are we ever going to come out with a BCorp Lite? And the founder said, no, it's supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be hard. So some of the benefits are definitely differentiation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this later, but there is a campaign that's going on social media right now, and it's called the Vote Everyday campaign, or Vote BCorp. Meaning, every day that you purchase something, you have a choice to make a purchase that actually from a company that you know is doing good, or maybe a company you have no idea what they're up to. And a lot of consumers are going, I'm going to go with the company I know is doing a good job. And part of the differentiation is you've gone through this third-party verification, and you can say for sure, when you see that BCorp logo on a product, you're like, yeah, I know this is a good company. I can trust that. And that's what really is one of the biggest differentiations. Media, consumers, and employees. So from a media perspective, and I don't want you thinking this is a PR exercise, that's the only thing I caution you, because it can't be faked. But from a media perspective, you have automatic trust and transparency. Since BDC has been a certified B Corp, we now rank with one of the most trusted banks in Canada. And I think it's just because we put it all out there. You can see everything about us. We're B Corp certified, you know exactly what we're doing. We are about entrepreneurs, that's all we do. And everything we make goes back into the entrepreneurs. That's who we are as a bank, which is unheard of if you think of a TD or a Royal Bank. They're all about shareholder return. That's just the structure of their particular entity. So it's easy for us to talk about trust and transparency. And if myself or my colleague Craig actually put something up in social media, we get so many more retweets and visibility than even our president does. Just because of the stories we're sharing. People love this stuff. So there is a piece of that that's really beneficial. Consumers are looking for that trust and transparency, and they want to know it's third-party verified. So there's a definite benefit to having that. And employers are looking for it as well. So the past 5 employees that have actually joined BDC joined us because we're B Corp certified. We have employees that are seeking us out because they want to work for a company that has all of this. And they want to make sure that what they say they're doing, they're actually doing. And in this generation, they're not going to stay with you if you're not really that kind of person or that kind of entity, if they don't feel it's happening there. So it's gold for that. So it's gold for attraction, retention, and engagement. Because you really have to map out your policies and procedures around that. And B Corp certified companies do some pretty cool stuff. You also benchmark with peers. So I mentioned the B Impact assessment. Every single time you answer that questionnaire, you are compared to the other 7,000 users of the B Impact assessment. You get instant feedback on where you are in the world when you answer that question. You might be way above the average business, you might be below, or you might be right in line. And you get that instant feedback from this particular certification. No other certification like that is out there. The other thing that's happening.
That benchmarking is all on the social effects and the
Policies, procedures, practices.
no dollar
everything.
value involved, no dollar benefit
No.
at all.
No. I mean, that's what your financial statements do for you and will always do for you. And you've got NACE codes and all the rest of it that can help you there, right? On your margins, etc. This is more on the added value, that value that wasn't captured before.
Yeah.
The other thing that's happening with this impact assessment is, has everybody heard about the Sustainable Development Goals? You've heard about those? So the UN Global Compact has Sustainable Development Goals, which is a worldwide initiative. But it generally is really kind of from a government perspective and a policy perspective. It's hard to translate that down into business and how you are being activated. But actually right now, the B Impact Assessment has been chosen to be mapped to the Sustainable Development Goals, so that when you complete that assessment, it will also give you an output of how you're contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals. So you can actually communicate on that, which I think is super cool because that's never happened before. So that's really exciting. And you get to do business with fellow B Corps. As you can imagine, they're pretty awesome. Every time I go to a Champions Retreat, which is where everybody gets together, the sharing of best practices, the vulnerability, there's no egos in the room, everybody is there for the right reasons. And these are major successful businesses too. It's not just about doing good, and it's not about being a nonprofit. It's actually about operating a really, really successful, viable business. So obviously Steve's B Corp, Ryan's a B Corp, and Natalie's a B Corp. And actually 2,655 plus companies around the world are B Corp certified in 150 different industries and 60 different countries. So you may recognize some of those. So Patagonia you're probably familiar with, Ben & Jerry's was one of the founding B Corps, Eileen Fisher is a clothing line. There's lots here that you may recognize and lots more that you can search out. So I wanted to take some time, and I'm mindful of my time, I only have 10 more minutes, it's gone by very fast. But I want to just explain a couple of things. So this B Corp movement has been around a long time. A lot of people would think that it's kind of for small companies or, you know, niche companies that are doing this kind of work, but it's not anymore. Unilever is the largest product company in the world. They have a number of different products underneath them. They purchased Ben & Jerry's, but they only purchased the assets. And Ben & Jerry's kept the name. Because if Unilever ever runs that company any differently than that was mapped out when they sold it, they will take their name back. And Unilever has held that commitment. But they've also purchased another 4, and I think there's another 2 actually that they just purchased that are B Corp certified companies. Because what they found is their sustainable brands, 2 years ago, were outperforming the regular brands by 30%, and the recent number is like 43%, I believe, outperforming the regular brands. This is a good investment, so that's why they're doing it. But Unilever is very committed to actually someday having every single company they own certified as B Corp. Danone, as I mentioned, is very, very committed as well. These are all B Corp companies they purchased. And then what they did was they said, we want every single B Corp, or every single Danone to be B Corp certified. And they set a goal to have B Corp Canada and B Corp North America, US, to be certified by 2020. But they did it last year in 2018. And they're now certified. That's huge. And now all of their packaging in Canada is gonna have the B on it. And they think that's really important. And it's a must-have for all of their businesses now. So they're very determined. So some of the other companies that maybe aren't as great at companies, if you think about it, like they've got some major issues. Johnson & Johnson, for example, they've purchased Method, which is a B Corp. They all are seeing that this is the way to go, that they can't actually hide behind some of their practices that they've been doing year over year. But it's definitely something that's catching on. There is a couple of publicly traded B Corps. There's Natura and Laureate University. Natura just purchased The Body Shop, largest transaction in 1 year. So they are hopefully getting The Body Shop certified as well. Laureate University is an interesting story that brings together kind of everything that I've been talking about. Laureate University is a private university. It's actually the largest private university in the world. It actually has over 1 million students, mostly online, but lots of brick and mortar. And they have different locations all over the world. And they were really concerned about basically the reputation of a private university. There was a lot of negative press around that. And they were thinking, you know, we're not that person. We're definitely not that person. We need a way to prove to everybody that we're a good company. And what they did was they said, well, the first thing we can do is be the largest benefit corporation company in the US. So that's the first thing they did. And then they said, okay, I think we need to get B Corp certified. But they had 75 different universities that had to complete that 200 questionnaire. Like, it was an incredible feat. They all had to do their individual ones, and then they had to be looked at collectively to see whether or not they could certify. And so how long do you think that took them to complete that assessment and everything that had to be done from 75 different universities around the world? Just think about that. What do you think?
4 years.
4 years? Anybody else? I'm glad you answered, because it goes back to that answer, that question you asked me earlier. It took them 3 months, which is incredible.
That is.
But they were that organized already. They really were that type of company already. So they were able to go through the assessment and produce all of the documentation and everything that they needed to prove that they were answering correctly. And they did become a B Corp certified company. And they have since recertified. So it wasn't something that was just something they wanted to do and then drop it after. No, they recertified. So that's pretty cool. The next thing they did is they wanted to raise some money. So they went public. And a lot of people ask me, well, if I'm gonna go public with my company, am I gonna lose money? Am I not gonna have investors? They raised $456 million in one day. And why? Because they had done all the homework to make sure that their investors knew that they were a trustworthy private university. And that was part of their journey. Excuse me, dry throat. So that's a really good story to give you an idea of how companies are evolving and why they're using this certification to actually prove that. So in Canada right now, we have 243, I believe, at my last count. And the most popular areas, of course, are British Columbia, because they're kind of like that already, and Ontario because they have the population. But Alberta has a lot of BCorps, and Quebec has a lot of BCorps now. Danone is actually in Quebec as well. That's where they are, and they're in Vancouver as well, with their Vega products. So we have the second largest community outside of the US, and Australia is just behind us, and the UK is just behind us. So we're doing pretty darn good. But I also think that we have a lot of businesses in Canada that are already doing business like this. So in the work that I do, I know B Corp certification is hard, and I love B Corp-ish companies too. So you don't have to certify to benefit from that assessment, which is the really cool thing. So after today, I'm going to share you a link where you can take the quick assessment if you've got a business or you're just interested in what all the questions are. And you can use that assessment. It's completely confidential. It's completely free. It's online. You can use it over and over again. You can use it as a strategy tool, a planning tool, and it comes with all sorts of information. So policy examples, procedure examples. There's an explain this and in practice for every single question. So there's so much feedback that you can get by this. And that's why I go around the country talking about this, because it's an incredible tool. And maybe someday you'll say, you know what, this is the way I want my business to be, and I'm going to certify. And we certainly hope that you do, because it is an incredible group of organizations that have done that. Any questions? Go ahead.
How much does it cost to become B Corp certification certified? Do you have to
Yeah, so
pay a fee?
it's based on your revenues, and it starts at $500 US a year. So in terms of certification fees, that's very low if you compare it to LEED certification or some of the other ones. I actually have a sheet that I use in Vancouver at one of my workshops. I don't have it with me today, but that actually compares it to other certifications. It's not that bad. It is a nonprofit organization behind it, and they do have to cover their costs. So, yeah. Go ahead.
When you change your articles of incorporation to include stakeholders,
Yeah.
does that open you up to any additional legal exposure?
No, it doesn't. Oh, it doesn't mean that, oh, you made a bad decision about the environment, so we can hold you accountable. It's not in that vein. It really is just that as shareholders of a company, you understand that this particular company might choose to use a widget that's this, might choose to offer extended benefits to their employees. And you'd be okay with that, because as a shareholder, you know this company is not all about shareholder return. It does not limit your dividends in any way. So there is a company out of, there's a type of company in BC, for example, called the CCC. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of it. It's the Community Contribution Company. And that one was developed to sort of be like a hybrid between for-profit and non-profit. And what it does is it says, okay, if you're a shareholder of this particular company, you can only pull this amount of dividends out of that company. The rest stays in and goes back into non-profit activities, etc. That is far more restrictive. This one just gives you the license to say, yeah, we're going to do that. And it seems silly, but it does help with the intention of the business, that this is the way we do business. So, yeah, and the other big thing is when you go to sell, you can say this is our company. So if you're purchasing the shares of our business, you have to maintain that, and you can put that in your share agreement. Yeah.
How do you think it impacts your ability to get like financing in terms of banks or investors? Do you think it changes anything? Does it improve it?
Well, I think if anything, the financial world is starting to understand what this is all about. And they realize that in order to be certified, you've obviously gone through
a lot to get there. So you've actually, you're probably operating a very, very good, healthy business because of it. So they do look at it that way. I think we're gonna see more visibility on this, and we're seeing a lot of trends where they're actually looking beyond just financial statements. We're also looking at, how is your business organized? So they are marrying the two. I mean, at BDC, we don't necessarily say, oh, you're BCorp certified, so we'll give you extra money. That's not, there's no correlation there. But at BDC, we always look at, your financial statements, who are your shareholders, who's in position of authority, all of that kind of stuff. We don't just look at your financial statements to actually give you a loan. We want to know everything. So I think that's going to happen more and more. And investors really like it. It's definitely something that, like I explained to you, Unilever, when they do acquisition, that's what they're looking for. BlackRock is looking for it now. So, yeah.
Certification will be a one-way street. There's no way you could decertify. You would be offending stakeholders that you've never met, that you don't even know yet.
Yeah, I mean, some companies choose to decertify for one reason or another.
And it works.
Just depending on circumstances. Where I see it most is if a company has certified like right at the 2-year mark and maybe it's too early and they're not a viable business in the end. So they maybe go under. Or if businesses choose to sell, there are circumstances where it doesn't carry over. So if they just sell the assets of the company, or they sell and they choose to focus on something differently, or a larger organization purchases it and that large organization can't certify right now. So
What are
there's
the
different
AGMs
situations.
like? Could this be an opportunity for disgruntled people to give you heck for absolutely everything and anything?
No, not really. No, it's not that way. I've never seen that happen in terms of anybody ever saying anything like that. No. Yeah. Having said that, every employee has a personal journey, so
And it's new
yeah, I mean,
yet,
I don't
you
think
know,
that they're
as-
any more
as
risk
the world
than a regular
turns.
company would be for that type of interpretation. Yeah. Go ahead.
So I'm just wondering, what are the like business opportunities or consulting opportunities in between, like where in certification process, or is there any related businesses that has involved in a consultancy product, in terms of certifications?
Sure. Well, what I usually recommend to businesses is that if they take the assessment, they go through the full 200 questions, they'll quickly learn whether their business maybe needs some help. Maybe they need policies and procedures. Maybe they need to implement more structure around their environmental reporting. Maybe they need help with a board of directors, etc. So what I usually do is I say, go through the assessment, find out maybe where you want to improve, and then look for specific help to improve you in those areas. That's usually what I suggest. Some of them can do that in-house. They have that type of expertise. Others may go out and look for consultants for different things. But generally, at that point, you're working with a consultant that is maybe an HR consultant, or maybe you're doing a strategic plan with a particular firm or something like that. There are a few really good impact planners that I know of that are doing some incredible work. So they'll work with companies to determine what is their impact business model, and they'll use the assessment as a base, and usually at the end of that particular process, you can certify. And it's a really interesting process because a lot of people come in and say, well, what's your impact business model? Oh, well, we recycle everything and we don't use any plastics. That's not an impact business model. So through that journey, you really start to understand who they are as an organization, which in the end, they then can communicate externally and internally a lot clearer. So there's that.
Can you give a specific example, like compared to other provinces, like focusing on Alberta, I mentioned, like what is going on in terms of the businesses, the certification process?
Yeah. So you've got some big ones here in Alberta. You've got Chandos Construction. Do you know Chandos?
Yes.
They are BCorp certified, and their CEO, he's just stepped down, or he's in the process of stepping down. Tom Reddle is very, very passionate about BCorp certification, and they are a construction company that has an employee ownership share program. They've always done things a little bit differently and have always cared a lot about their people, and that's made a big difference. And there you go. Yeah.
There's a couple of smaller businesses.
And there's some smaller ones, there's Unbelts, Poppy Barley is actually their shoe company, they're really cool. They're certified. You've got some larger ones in Calgary, like Benevity and Fiesta Gelato and Trico Developments that are actually BCorp certified. So it's really a growing community here. Like I've always felt like I grew up in Edmonton, and I've always felt like Edmonton is all about community, and businesses have always just operated that way. So I could see the opportunity being huge here because that's just who they are, right? So I think in the talks that I've had, there's a lot of people interested and a lot of people going through the process now. And a lot of activity. Last year we sponsored a conference called the Enlightened Economy Conference, and we're doing that again this year.
In Edmonton?
In Edmonton, yeah, with Millennials University, and then another organization is helping us organize it this year. I can't remember what their name is. I wasn't familiar with them beforehand, but just a lot of work going around there. I think Shandos is actually launching a speaker series where they're bringing in some really amazing CEOs to have some conversations. So, yeah.
So you mentioned that you get some feedback when you do that impact assessment. Is that
Yeah.
just you conversing with your impact assessor? Do you actually get hard numbers? Is there a rank?
Yeah, you get numbers. So like if you do the quick assessment, which I'll share that with you, the link, and I always think it's a great place to start because it's just a sampling of questions. It should really only take you about 20 to 30 minutes. It gives you an idea of how the questions are asked, what kind of information you might need handy when you're answering them. And in that assessment, you will just be given the feedback: are your practices above the line, below the line, or right in line with what other companies because they're in the assessments, there's 78 different assessments. So they're based on number of employees, industry, your location, and that's what creates your particular assessment. So your assessment might not be the same as your neighbors. So when you're answering the question, it's always industry specific and size specific where you're getting the feedback. So if you notice that you have some questions that are way below, and you'll notice that in terms of points when you transfer into the full assessment, it will be assigned points, and each question will show you whether or not you're getting points or not. And then you'll be able to say, well, you know what, a lot of people go through it and it's very enlightening. Like they're like, yeah, you know what, we wanted to have this policy for employees to take sick leave or whatever, but we've never written it down. We've been thinking about it though, or you do it like just sort of ad hoc. And so a lot of people are going, yeah, that's a priority, I'm gonna make a policy on that. And so that journey becomes a real sort of, I would say almost like a strategic plan. So I know one company, Fire Clay Tile, took 4 years to certify, and they wanted to certify so badly because Salesforce at the time was giving a 20% discount to any BCorp certified company, and they wanted to adopt the Salesforce program. So they're like, yeah, we're gonna do it because of that. And then they came in way below and they're like, oh, we have a lot of work to do. But the owner was like, we're gonna do this. I'm gonna get this BCorp certification. So every year he kept trying to improve. And finally when he certified, I think it was 4 to 5 years from when he first started, he finally got BCorp certification. He was so excited, but Salesforce didn't offer the 20% off anymore. But he still got it. He's still a major champion of the process. It really helped to grow his business in a really positive way. But his story is pretty cute. Yeah. So everybody's motivated differently. The other thing about the assessment, I'll just pop forward here because I will say, we don't have time to go through it. I do workshops where we actually get into the assessment, but the other thing I'll just mention about that assessment, it's not about being perfect in every single one of those categories. No business is. We're not great in environment, and because we have so many branches across the country that have so many different landlords, and it's hard for us to measure and improve on that. And so we're like, okay, we're okay with that. But we're good in governance and employees and our impact business model. Those are the areas that we do really well in. So a lot of people will start this assessment and they'll be like, oh, I don't do this. Oh, I don't do that either. Oh, I don't do this. Oh, forget it. I'm not doing any more of this. I feel bad about myself. don't approach it that way. You don't have to be perfect in every section. Measure what matters to you most as an entrepreneur. Remember to do that. And if you approach it that way, you'll get a lot of value out of it. Have I mentioned everything else? And like I said, there's tons of tools and guides and example reports, etc., for you to create for your specific company. So, hopefully that helped.
Absolutely.
Any more questions?
Yeah, you mentioned the other thousands of companies that have a certification similar to BCorp.
The benefit corporation
Yeah,
legislation.
which, I'm just curious, sort of, who'd be up in the top three, I guess?
Who
As-
are
as far as
benefit
as far as-
corporation
yeah,
companies?
the size, yeah.
Yeah, for size, well, obviously Danone is the largest one in the world now. Danone North America is a benefit corporation, has benefit corporation status.
No, I'm
Legal
looking
status.
for, like, the competition in the market for BCorp. You said there's other companies.
Oh, other certifications, do you
Right.
mean? There's no other certification that looks at the entire business. It's really the only one that looks at it in this particular lens. So it's very unique.
Sure.
So, yeah. The other certifications will certify like a process, a product, a building, so they're kind of limited to that. If you have other certifications, sometimes it's easier to complete the BCorp certification because you've got a lot of that data already. And many do have more than one certification. Some companies like to have many. Some just pick 2 or 3 that they really are, that really mean something to them. So, yeah.
Sorry if I missed it here.
No,
I was
that's okay.
wondering, who owns the BCorp certification?
It's a nonprofit organization. The founders are from And1, so they're still the founders, and then they have a board of directors, and they have B-Labs throughout the world. So there's like a B-Lab Australia, B-Lab UK, B-Lab Brazil, B-Lab Italy, and then there's actually going over into B-Lab China. So there's lots of different global partners that are all coming together for the same purpose, but the standards team does remain in the US.
So, how you were, like, you were from BDC, right?
Pardon me?
You are like, you were representing from, like,
Yeah.
business development. Right?
Yeah.
So how you are associated with that? Because I just came here.
Yeah.
I don't know, like, how-
So this is my role at BDC, is to help share this BCorp certification and talk about why it's important to BDC and why we're certified. But I'm also a quasi-employee of B-Lab, the organization behind the certification. So I work with that team here in Canada, so our B-Lab Canada team. And because BDC is across the country, because we're exclusively dedicated to entrepreneurs, and this is an entrepreneurial movement, it made sense for us to get involved. And we have the certification ourselves as well and see the value. So, so that's how we're involved.
Yeah, it's really to help spread the word.
Yeah, yeah. We don't, like, I'm not pushing certification. I know it's hard. I do highly recommend using the assessment because there's just so much helpful information there as you're going through and building your business. Even if you're going through startup, you can basically identify the areas that, you know, as a business, you want to definitely create. When I have employees, I want to definitely have these kind of policies and procedures in place. As much work as possible up front makes the entrepreneur's life easier in the journey, basically. So, yeah.
Can you guys join me in thanking Carla?
Well, I know it went by really fast. I hope I answered enough questions, but Meg's here locally, so that's really nice. And